Welcome back to Razmafsar TV. Today I'm having Miles Vining back to our channel, and this is a very important talk for us, for me, for Miles, for everyone, because what's going on in Afghanistan at the moment, I think it's very important for all of us to have a discussion on that. To me, let me just first of all, before I just keep talking a lot, first of all, welcome back to Razmafsar TV, Miles.
Thank you very much, sir. I really appreciate being back. Always a pleasure to be on.
Miles, you had years of experience in as a veteran of the U.S. Special Forces and Marines in Afghanistan. We talked in this channel about that. So I think you are one of few who has real experience what's going on or what was going on in Afghanistan. And to me, as someone who I have never been to Afghanistan, I just read about history of Afghanistan, of course, because of arms and armor, we all know, right? And north of Afghanistan, they speak Persian, and that's the reason, one of the reasons. I don't only read Persian speaking, of course. But when I heard that Afghanistan was, Taliban came into power, to me it was a bit really surprising, because I heard, at least from US sources, that Afghanistan or Afghan Army had 300,000 soldiers. So I just asked myself, 300 soldiers just go away like this? Or so how many people did Taliban have in such a, let's say, military operation who could conquer 300,000 or defeat 300,000 armed personnel of Afghan National Army?
So, I mean, to answer, well, so a lot of people in the U.S. are saying that too, and they're saying, oh, how did the Afghan Army, like, did they not stand and fight? Was this like, is this like the French Army of like World War II, where, everybody makes the jokes about the French just giving up completely, or other, any other conflict in the world. And I don't think this was not a defeat of a week, of 2 weeks, of 3 weeks. This was a slow grinding defeat of the past 6 years. For 7 years at this point, since 2014, when U.S. forces transitioned to the Miliardo, the Afghan Army. We have to remember that the ANA has been fighting on its own since 2014, and been sustaining tremendous casualties and losses, and horrible losses. And I saw it when I left in 2014, in that we made it worse for the ANA in terms of the fighting, because we were training a conventional army to fight against the Taliban. But what I personally viewed was that because every time we were fighting against the Taliban, it was constantly a game of cat and mouse, in that especially with the technology, with IEDs, in that we would put out something and then the Taliban would counter it, and then we would put something to counter that, and then they would counter this, and just constantly escalating against each other in terms of, they would put out a certain kind of IED, a victim operated one, or they would put out, a pressure plate on the road, and then we would put out a mine roller to stop the pressure, so the IED would blow up in front of the vehicle instead of under the vehicle. And then the Taliban realized we were doing that, and then they would offset the variable time of the bomb. So then they would give a delay. So then the IED would actually go off under the vehicle, because you'd hit the pressure plate, and then it would wait about 2 seconds for the vehicle to drive over and then blow up. So then the Army had something where they had a mine roller that would go back and forth, so it would alternate. So sometimes it would be 15 meters ahead, sometimes it would be 2 meters ahead. So, but that's an example of escalation of TTPs and strategies, right? And what happened was that, well, on the battlefield, we escalated it so much, and we and the Taliban escalated against each other. The ANA never got up to our level. They never had the capability that we did in terms of the counter IED measures, in terms of the really good medevac procedures, in terms of a lot of the IED fighting that was going on, they didn't have that, right? So all of a sudden now we left, and then the Taliban is left with a far inferior enemy that is much easier to fight against than the U.S. military was. So taking on the ANA after the U.S. military was, much easier. And so you got to remember, this defeat came after, from 2014 up till now. This was not a defeat several weeks in the making, not at all. So what else happened though? And then that's the other thing, is that I think the Afghan government and those in the urban centers were, when I say the urban centers, the traditional cities of Afghanistan that have always been Jalalabad, Kabul, Herat, Mazar Sharif, Kandahar city, and then actually also Peshawar. But Peshawar is now, over the Durand line. But I think there's a big feeling within the urban cities, urban centers, of this very delusional thinking, of thinking that the fighting was progressing much better than it actually ever was. Whereas in the meantime, you see the ANA just taking tremendous casualties and losses. And these weren't a secret. It wasn't like a secret about the casualties. I mean, this is well documented, well known by everyone on all sides. You just had to go sniffing for it and you'd see it. SIGAR and the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan in the US, documented this every single year. It was just so bad, all these casualties, the ANA, and the thing is, they're not sustainable. The amount of wounded and dead that they were taking couldn't be replaced at the rate that they were taking them. And then there's also that, attritional fighting. So the ANA was just getting hit left and right. And the other problem was that a bigger problem with the government and the logistical systems, and more of the bigger systems that were in place, they weren't working. It was a broken system. It was always a broken system. There are accounts of ANA positions, fighting until they run out of ammunition and they have to surrender because they're not being supported by their logistical systems. There's no quick reaction force. There's no supplies because generals are siphoning it off, or it was gone here, or there was no interconnection there. And I mean, you have entire in like 2-3 weeks ago, you had entire companies and battalions that were surrendering because they were cut off and they couldn't, they would have gladly fought on had they been supported, but they weren't supported at the end of the day. So that was something that happened there. And I think that also relies into in Kabul, especially Kabul, with the government. And I had a lot of government friends that I talked to, and people in there. And some of it was very delusional thinking of, our boys will hold the line and, they'll hold it. But the reality of the matter is that they weren't holding the line, and then the casualties were too much. And, I very vividly remember, like 2 months ago or so, I'm talking to a very close friend I have in Kabul. And I said, hey man, like, this is not good. Things are going south. And he said, what do you mean? It's like the media isn't reporting the good news. It's like there were 800 Taliban that were killed in this one battle. And I said, 800? That's a vastly unsubstantiated number. I mean, 800 humans die anywhere in the world. That's a lot of people to be dead in one day. And that's substantiated by facts and figures and reports and families and Shaheed photos and coffins, and like 800 bodies don't just disappear, man. So people were believing that. Like the government was like, oh yeah, we killed 800 of them in one battle. And it's like, but you didn't. That's not substantiated by anything. And the same thing was happening in Burma early at the beginning of this year. I heard Burmese protesters in Yangon say, oh, I heard 200 Burmese soldiers were killed by the Karen in the most recent fighting. And I was like, that's just not true. That's just categorically, statistically, that's not true. There just isn't any evidence to support that. So, and that sort of delusional thinking was going on. And the feeling in Kabul, as I talked to people, as this just nightmare of a train wreck just went on and on and on. This nightmare just kept on going. And And as I was talking to people in Kabul, the general feeling I was getting was that, well, it's going to be a tough couple months. This is going to be the worst part of the war, but we'll get through it. Like, our boys will come through. And I was trying to point out to people, and I was saying, I hate to say I called it, but 2 months ago, I was telling people, no, a month ago, I was telling people in Kabul, I was like, look at the documentaries of Saigon falling in 1975. It was, of a state on that collapses in battle. It was not this World War I style, trench warfare and death until the end, where you can see the end coming. No, it was as in Saigon. It was a couple very key battles that were somewhat quick, a day or two in duration, and it was fighting that took place at very key avenues of approach and critical vulnerabilities. And this intersection was taken, and that intersection was taken, and this city and that highway, and that now there's a free way into Saigon. And that's exactly how it was for the Taliban, in that a couple very key strategic points were fought very hard over by both sides, and the Taliban sort of moved the critical vulnerability over to their side. And once that started to shift, it's like it gains momentum, and there's nothing that can be stopped. And I think for that, and I was telling people in Kabul this, but everyone was like, no, you're wrong. We've killed 800 Taliban in this one thing. Well, how is it substantiated? Well, the media isn't reporting it. And then likewise, the idea, the feeling, the memory of the 1990s was so prevalent, especially 1993 and 89, where it was that way in Kabul, where it was this because it was the civil war. And the thing is, Kabul Afghanistan in the 90s, what really resembles Syria today, in that you have all these militia groups where no one is bigger than the other. So what you end up is this just 1984 style of forever war, where all these militia groups just keep on jabbing away at each other, but no one can take over another. And that is the case in Syria today, where you have militia groups and they may gain a town here or lose a town there, but it's kind of this forever war state, just like in 1984. No one power is as big as the other. The difference today, though, and everyone thought that because everyone remembers of the older generation of Afghans, and a lot of the kids then are now the adults and government people now. They remember that very vividly, of just Kabul just getting wrecked, and everybody, because Kabul turned into this free fire war zone of Masood against Gulbuddin against Dostum, and they were just blowing each other to bits, and it was horrible. And they thought that was going to be the same thing over again today, and the reality is it just wasn't. And the same thing with Jalalabad. So a lot of Afghans were telling me, in 1989, when the Soviets left, there's this massive offensive against Jalalabad. When the Soviets left, massive offensive by the various Mujahideen groups, ISI, maybe CIA was involved, like a lot of these Arab and Saudi mercenaries and, jihad freedom fighters and stuff like that. Massive assault on Jalalabad. And Jalalabad actually held out in 1989. The government forces actually held out. And Jalalabad didn't fall to the Mujahideen forces until the early 90s, 92 or 93 or whatever. But a lot of Afghans today were pointing to that historical precedent of Jalalabad, and they're saying, look, this is our Jalalabad moment, in that, the Americans have fully pulled out. We're on our own. We have to hold the major cities. If we can hold the major cities, such as a Jalalabad moment, if we can hold the major cities and just hold it and lock it down and not surrender and just fight to the death for these major cities, we'll be able to negotiate something. We'll start getting stuff back. Ghani will ally with the warlords and the Jang Salar and get them to, whatever. We'll figure it out. All right, we'll figure it out. But we have to hold the provincial capitals, the big 5 cities that I told you about that historically formed the country. And that was the case until Herat fell. And then last week, among all my Afghan friends, Herat went down, and my friends in Kabul were telling me it was like someone just killed the mood. the whole country realized this is the end when Herat fell, because that was the Jalalabad moment, and Herat fell in one day after some extensive fighting, but it fell, and that was the emotional dive that the whole population took and was like, Herat's done. We're not going to have a Jalalabad moment. And then later on, Lashkar Gah, and then I think it was Lashkar Gah and Kandahar fell on the same day, and then Mazar Sharif and Jalalabad fell, and then Kabul next, and it was like boom, 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 you know. So I don't know. We can unpack that, or that's, I don't know. That's kind of a skinny of a summary of everything I've seen so far.
And thank you very much for your extensive explanations. That's exactly what I said, because the way you explain is, for me, much more valuable than many colleagues who do, write scholarly, I know I don't want to step on anyone's toes, right? Articles about what's going on in Afghanistan, but what you are saying is the most valuable, because I always say, we all know that what a man on the ground, which experience what you had, is very valuable. Let me just ask you one thing. First of all, I'm really surprised. Who are these Taliban? Excuse me, I'm asking you this question. Where do they come from? Who are they? So they're mostly from south of Afghanistan. Am I correct?
Pashtuns. Well, the Taliban, yeah, they are the Taliban is a Pashtun nationalist movement that sees Pashtun superiority over the rest of the country. That's, if we want to get as boiled down as that. And now when I say Pashtun, I'm talking about both sides of the border, about across the Durand line, about Pashtun families that are from Pakistan and are from Afghanistan. And they don't make a distinction to that line that divides the two, that the tribe, the Qawm, is more important than any sort of international boundary. So, and that's, and that's where these guys are from. Now, there are Taliban that are of different ethnicities. There's Tajik, Uzbek, Hazara Taliban, like in all sorts of different ranks and capacities. Like it's a diverse group as well. Okay, that they value diversity and representation, but the Pashtun are more represented than anything. And there's a famous phrase about the Taliban that goes, not all Pashtuns are Taliban, but all Taliban are Pashtun. So that's something to take into account. I mean, it's a Pashtun nationalist movement that seeks to superimpose its identity of essentially village life, rural Pashtunwali ideals on the whole country. And there's something to be said here in that, so for the majority of the Afghan history, Afghanistan has always been ruled, and the power holders have always been Pashtuns, with the exception of Sekoy, the Sekoy Baba, or whatever his name was, who took over from Amanullah Khan in the 1920s for 1 year. He was a Tajik or something. But so the idea of a democratic government does not sit well within a rural Pashtuns framework, in that the Pashtuns are not in charge. The interesting thing as well, though, is we have to remember that, and when I say, like, this Pashtunwali, this way of the Pashtun, that comes from a lot of the rural Pashtuns that are living in, yes, the south. Kandahar has been, the attributed birthplace of the Taliban, but also in, places like Nangarhar, a lot of the eastern provinces, and then also a lot in Pakistan, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, a lot of the Pakistani provinces that are majority Pashtun. So the point I want to emphasize here, though, is that, you have places like Jalalabad, which is, one of these big 5 urban centers I mentioned. And Jalalabad, although Jalalabad is, Pashtun central, that's Pashtunistan. Jalalabad itself as a city has actually been more on the edge of sort of more progressive and more urbanized, so to speak, and less of that village lifestyle because it's a major city, it's a major urban center. And so we have to differentiate between, you know, Pashtuns whose identity lies in those villages and in that rural setting where things like honor, things like a women's code of ethics, things like Islam have a very different value from those Pashtuns who are living in sort of the urban areas, such as Jalalabad, who don't share those values as much or to the extent that the rural Pashtuns do. So, and that's where the Taliban, that's where the roots of the Taliban come from in terms of their values and ethics and everything on that. And that's why I always like to caution people when they say like, oh, you know, the Taliban are religious extremists, or they're like, this is the face of like fanatical Islam. And it's like, they are like, they are kind of nuts, and they do their own kind of thing, but realize that you can't look at the Taliban and be like, oh, this is the face of radical Islam. It's like there's some of that element going on there, but it's also this Pashtun identity that's wrapped up in it. So you have to be very careful, I think, with differentiating between there. Whereas if we look at, you know, Al Qaeda in Afghanistan, it's like Al Qaeda is a pan-Islamic, you know, international, you know, political terrorist organization that sort of cuts your national ties, and now you are a part of this bigger idea. It doesn't matter where you're from, you can be one of us. All right, you can't, it does matter where you're from in terms of being Taliban, right? It does matter where you're from. You have to be Pashtun. You have to be from one of these rural cities. You have to have those values, you know, to be in the Pashtun, to be in the Taliban chain of command, to be in the leadership, to do that stuff. You cannot be a Saudi and then be in the Taliban. You just can't. As you could with ISIS, as you could with Al Qaeda, you know, it's that pan-Islamic idea. You know, it doesn't matter where you're from. We're all equal in the faith of what we see as the lesser jihad within Islam, and like anybody can join. It doesn't matter where you are. You prove your worth in the organization. The Taliban is not like that. The Taliban is a Pashtun nationalist movement. So.
Two questions I have, Miles. Regarding the force, I mean, I know we cannot have statistics on that, only estimations or estimates. How many soldiers or fighters do Taliban have? Do we even know?
I think some of the, I think the intelligence estimates, I mean, that are publicly available, I don't know, they probably are numbered in like the tens of thousands of fighters. But again, we have to remember, it's like, this is not a standing army. This is not a professional army with contracts. These guys these are fighters that come and go. This is more of a very organized militia. You know, some of them are on payroll, some of them aren't. So, I'm almost curious to see maybe a lot of Taliban after this success in Afghanistan. A lot of Taliban might say, hey, I don't want to fight anymore. Countries reunited. We kicked the U.S. out. We got ourselves approved as a dominant force. All right, it's time to go back to farming. You know, that some did before. Or they're going to try for political things and, you know, try to be, you know, some kind of governor or weigh themselves in and take over positions that are now vacant and stuff like that. But it's hard to tell with that. There is no Taliban payroll. This isn't a uniformed service, you know, for that matter.
Miles, regarding the Pashtuns in Pakistan, do you have, I mean, I know it's hard to ask, but they're like a minority in Pakistan, am I correct?
Yeah, you have the northwest part of the country of Pashtuns, and then you have Baluch, and then you have Sindh. You have a number of other ethnicities as well, and the Pashtuns there are mostly centered around the northwest.
Okay. So, and then, so I understood you correctly. You cannot be in a command or a commander or a leader in Taliban because you need to be one of these groups or Pashtuns, but eventually they could have soldiers from other nationalities. Am I correct?
They do have soldiers from other ethnicities, from various tribes in the country and stuff. And yeah, there are there's sort of like maybe a Hazara commander here, or maybe a Tajik commander here, or maybe an emir here who might be of this. Yeah, there's Tajik emirs and stuff like that. But like if you want to be taken seriously in the organization and you want to get into the upper ranks and stuff, it's like, no, you better be Pashtun. It's like that's the identity. That's where we're from. That's the membership card that it takes to play in that group. With that.
Okay. And they speak, of course, their Pashtun as their language is. Am I correct, Miles?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, Pashtu. Pashtu is, yeah, and there's two, almost three dialects of Pashtu. You have Kandahari Pashtu and Nangarhari Pashtu, spoken in the south. Kandahari Pashtu is spoken in Kandahar and Helmand, Uruzgan, some of the other Pashtun areas there. And then you have more Nangarhari Pashtu, which is spoken in Jalalabad in Pakistan, which is more of the mountain one. And I don't know, a quick way to tell, just getting into linguistics. Yeah, this is a Pashtu keyboard right here for an iPad. But the Nangarhari will have more like more guttural, like kind of a ch sound in a lot, like khade for good, and then the same words will be pronounced with more of a softer, like sh sound in the south. But more like shade would be like the same word in Helmand. So, and that's a key thing to realize though, in that, what kind of Pashtu is being spoken. Is it the Nangarhari kind or the Kandahari kind? Because the Kandahari kind, well, the Nangarhari kind from Pakistan as well, that's what all the Pakistani speakers are speaking. The dialect spoken in Helmand and Kandahar, a lot of those guys, yeah, they're very, they're just as legitimate Taliban. But the base of this Pashtunwali identity, the real hardcore ideology of where it comes from is, in the mountains, in those very inaccessible, hard to reach mountains in that eastern part of the country, and in the northwestern part of Pakistan. And that's where they've developed, this very much, we are very self-sufficient and independent. We're on our own. We want to live our own lifestyle. These are our values in regards to women, Islam, etc. It's like, that's where that comes from, much less so from Kandahar and from Helmand. So.
And most of them, or all of them, are Sunnis, right?
Yes, Pashtuns are almost unequivocally follow the Sunni schools of Islam, whereas in Afghanistan, you really just have the Hazara group, which is Shia, which that's a bridge that they're trying to gap right now. There's news of Taliban, going to Shia festivals right now in Kabul, like sitting in at festivals with the Hazara tribes, and saying, hey, if you're Hazara, you can practice your Shia religion and you can practice your festivals. We won't trample on that. Whereas in the 1990s, the Taliban, went hardcore after the Hazara, hardcore after the Shia, very much against them. They actually called them kafirs. It's like, those Hazara Shia, it's like they're kafirs in our own country kind of thing. And things reached a breaking point actually with Iran in the 90s when the Taliban actually executed a number of Iranian officials at the consulate in Herat when that got taken over. And that was a flashpoint with Iran. Iran almost threatened to invade, or invade in a small force or something at that time. I'm sure you remember and were aware of that.
Yes.
So there was very anti-Shia in the 90s, but today, I don't know where it's going to go. They're doing this like show. A lot of people think, a lot of Afghans are saying to me is that like everyone thinks the Taliban might have changed, but and everyone's saying like, look, they're having press conferences and they're like saying they're having these things for saying like, brothers, like sisters, we need you, we respect the rights of women, and we're doing all this stuff with Hazara festivals. And some people are telling me it's like, I don't think that's it. While the U.S. and while the international attention is on them, we're gonna show this face of change. But when the international attention goes away, it's back to doing what we want. And that's one mentality among a lot of expats, a lot of Afghan expats and Afghans inside that think things will change when the cameras turn off or roll somewhere else.